This is Move Anyway, The Knight's Armor Principles, Volume 7. Decide, move, act, leave footprints anyway. By Kenny Knight III. Read by Rick Gines. Dedication. To the Rage family. This book is dedicated to the Rage family. To every person who walked through those doors looking for something more. To every early morning warrior who showed up before the sun came up. To every evening grinder who came in after a long day of work, tired but determined. To every athlete, fighter, parent, entrepreneur, student, veteran, and dreamer who chose to challenge themselves instead of settling for average. Thank you for believing in the vision. Thank you for trusting the process. Thank you for allowing me to be part of your journey. Rage Fitness was never just about workouts, weights, or conditioning. It has always been about people. It's about growth, discipline, accountability, and becoming the best version of ourselves. You have inspired me far more than you will ever know. Together, we've celebrated victories, overcome setbacks, faced challenges, and continued moving forward when it would have been easier to quit. This book is as much yours as it is mine. Thank you for being part of the Rage family. Keep challenging yourself. Keep growing. Keep moving anyway. Acknowledgements. There is no way I could write this book without acknowledging the people who have stood beside me throughout the years. To my clients who have been with me for years, thank you. Some of you have been with me through multiple gym locations, business changes, challenges, successes, and everything in between. You've watched programs change. You've watched businesses evolve. You've watched ideas succeed and fail. You've watched me learn, adapt, and grow. And through it all, you continue to show up. Your loyalty, trust, and support mean more than I can ever put into words. Thank you for allowing me to coach you, encourage you, challenge you, and sometimes push you beyond what you thought was possible. The truth is that you've taught me just as much as I've taught you. You've taught me patience. You've taught me leadership. You've taught me resilience. You've taught me the importance of showing up, even on the days you don't feel like it. To everyone who has attended a boot camp, a fitness class, a boxing session, a speaking event, purchased a book, supported Salute supplements, shared a social media post, referred a friend, or simply believed in what we are building, thank you. You are the reason this journey has been possible. Most importantly, thank you for trusting me with a small part of your life. The lessons in this book were learned through experience, but many of those experiences were shared with you. This book is a reflection of that journey. Together, we've learned that success isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about discipline. It's about action. It's about continuing to move forward, regardless of the obstacles in front of us. Thank you for walking this path with me. Thank you for helping me leave footprints. And thank you for leaving your own. Prologue. When the lights hit. I was 4, maybe 5, too young to understand consequences, old enough to remember everything. We were driving through Ridgely, Maryland, a small town where you don't need a map to know where you belonged. Uptown looked one way, down the road looked another. And right in the middle was the line. Not painted, not marked, but everybody knew it was there. My dad was riding that line. Then the lights hit. Red and blue flooded the rearview mirror like a warning from God himself. Any normal person pulls over. My dad hit the gas. No hesitation, no second guessing, no, maybe I should. Just a decision and action. The engine roared, and suddenly we weren't just driving, we were running. I remember gripping the seat, my heart pounding in my chest, too young to fully understand fear, but feeling all of it anyway. The street blurred. Streetlights turned into streaks. Ahead of us was that road I knew too well. There was the church, and right past it was that sharp, unforgiving 120-degree turn. Most people slow down there. My dad didn't. We flew past the church, and he whipped that car around the bend like the laws of physics didn't apply to him. No brakes, no mercy, just movement. Then he did something I'll never forget. He killed the lights. Pitch black. No headlights. No taillights. just darkness and instinct. That little red Honda Civic turned into a ghost. We shot down the road and into my grandparents' yard like we were disappearing off the face of the earth. No slowing down, no careful parking, just tires tearing through grass, cutting around the house, and sliding into the backyard near my grandmother's clothesline. Then silence. "Get down," he said. I didn't argue. I didn't question. I just moved. I hit the floorboard. He leaned his seat back, and we laid there, still, quiet, waiting, watching, listening, hiding. The sirens screamed past us, then again, and again, up and down that street for what felt like forever, 15, maybe 20 minutes. They were looking hard, because a man doesn't just vanish. But we did. Right or wrong, my dad made a decision, and once he made it, he committed. No halfway, no doubt, no turning back. At that age, I didn't understand morality. I didn't understand consequences. But I understood something else, something that would stick with me long after that night was over. Movement, action, decide, and go. Years later, I found myself doing the same thing. Different situations, same mindset. Running, acting, moving before thinking, following footsteps I didn't even realize I was walking in. Because when that movement comes, when pressure hits, when fear shows up, when the lights flash in your rearview mirror, you don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your conditioning. This book isn't about running from police. It's about running towards something. Because most people, they sit, they wait, they overthink, they hesitate. They see the lights and they freeze. But there's another way to live. A way where you stop negotiating with fear. A way where you stop waiting for perfect conditions. A way where you stop asking for permission. You make a decision and you move. Not when you're ready. Not when it's safe. Not when it makes sense. Now. Because hesitation will trap you longer than failure ever will. This is Volume 7. This is about action. This is about doing it scared. This is about becoming the kind of person who doesn't sit on the side of the road when life turns on the lights, but the kind who decides and goes. Chapter 1. Decide or Drift. I still remember it like it was yesterday. That moment where life doesn't politely ask you what you want to do. It forces you to choose. Decide or drift. I was 14 years old, sitting at the table with my mom. I'd told this story before, but what people don't understand is what was really happening underneath that moment. On the outside, it looked like a conversation. On the inside, it was a war, because I already felt it. I was drifting, not crashing, not completely out of control, just slowly, steadily, becoming nothing, going with whatever was around me, drinking, hanging out, running with whoever showed up. No direction, no structure, no purpose, just movement with no mission. That's the dangerous kind of drift, the kind you don't even realize is killing you. I had every reason to keep going down that road. At 13 years old, I was already living grown man consequences with a kid's mindset. My dad had taken off to Georgia and left behind a 1976 Chevy Nova, a 1972 Cadillac, and a 1979 Honda motorcycle. They didn't run. Most people would have let them sit there and rot. I didn't. I was into auto mechanics in school, and my teacher let me bring that Nova into the shop. While everybody else was working on small projects, I was rebuilding something real. Turns out, the only thing wrong with it was the clutch. So I sold the Cadillac and bought a clutch with some of the money. I fixed the Nova at 13. And then I started driving it. No license, no registration, no insurance. Didn't matter. I'd pull up to school like it was normal, park it in the back lot so nobody asked questions, and go about my day like I belonged behind that wheel. Because in my mind, I did. That's the problem when you start doing things early. You start thinking you're ahead, when really, you're just unsupervised. I wasn't building discipline. I was building confidence without direction. That's a dangerous combination. By 14 or 15 years old, I was taking that same car to places I had no business being. The 4-H park, turned nightclub at night. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I was. I blended in, moved around like I belonged in rooms I hadn't earned yet, and in the trunk of that Nova, a shotgun. That was my normal. That was my environment. That was the road I was on. And here's the truth most people don't want to admit. When you live like that long enough, it starts to feel regular. Nothing feels wrong anymore. Nothing feels off. You just drift deeper, further away from who you could be, and closer to who you'll regret becoming. But even in that chaos, I felt it. That voice, that pull, that knowing that if I didn't make a decision soon, life was going to make one for me, and it wasn't going to be a good one. So there I was, 14 years old, sitting across from my mom, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. I'm going to the Marine Corps. I didn't fully understand what that meant. I didn't know how it would happen. I didn't know what it would cost me, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep drifting. Because drifting feels easy in the moment, but it's expensive in the long run. That decision didn't magically fix everything. I didn't wake up the next day as a different person. I still had the same environment, the same habits, the same pull trying to drag me back. But something changed. My direction. I had a target now. Once you have a target, even if you're not perfect, you stop moving aimlessly. That's the difference. Most people think success comes from massive action all at once. It doesn't. It comes from one decision that cuts off every other option. That moment at that table, that was the line. Before that, I was drifting. After that, I was moving. Not perfectly, not clean, but intentionally. And that's all it takes to start changing your life. You don't need a perfect plan or full confidence. You don't need guaranteed outcomes. You need a decision. Because at some point, you're going to have to ask yourself the same question I did. Am I choosing this life, or am I just letting it happen to me? One choice leads somewhere, the other leads nowhere. And the worst part, you won't even realize it until it's too late. When it was time to leave, I was terrified. Not a little nervous, not slightly unsure. Terrified. People don't talk about that part. They talk about courage like it's clean, like it shows up polished and ready. It doesn't. It shows up shaking. I had fear stacked on top of fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of failure. Fear of success. Fear of dying. Fear of stepping into a world I didn't understand. Because the truth was, I didn't know how the world worked outside of what I grew up in. I didn't know how to operate out there. I didn't know the rules. And when you don't know the rules, everything feels like a risk. But what messed with me even more were the thoughts. What if it works? What if I actually make it out? What if I actually become something? Now I've got to live up to it. Now I've got to maintain it. I've got to operate at a level I've never seen before. That fear hits different, because failure is familiar. Success? That's foreign territory. I wasn't raised in that. I was raised in survival. At one point, there was structure. When my mom and dad were together, there were rules. There was direction. But when that fell apart, so did everything else. My mom was busy. My dad was gone. And me? I was figuring it out on my own. No blueprint, no guidance, no one checking me. Just life coming at me however it wanted. So I adapted the only way I knew how. I started doing whatever it took. Stealing, robbing, cheating the system. Not because I thought it was right, but because it worked in the moment. It got me through. That's the part people judge without understanding. When you're in survival mode, you don't think long term. You think right now. You think about making it through the day, the week, the moment. And I got good at that. Too good. Because when something works, even if it's wrong, you justify it. You normalize it. You build your life around it. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a life and that it wasn't going to end well. You can only outrun consequences for so long before they catch up and collect everything you owe with interest. So there I was, standing at the edge of everything I knew. Scared, uncertain, unprepared, and still, I knew I had to move away. That's the part most people miss. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's movement in spite of it. Because if you wait until you feel ready, you'll be waiting the rest of your life. If you wait until you understand everything, you'll never start. If you wait until fear disappears, you'll die exactly where you are. I didn't have confidence. I didn't have clarity. I didn't have guarantees. What I had was a decision. And sometimes that's enough. Because staying where I was, that was a guaranteed loss. Moving forward, at least that gave me a chance. And that's what this comes down to. You don't need certainty to move. You need honesty. Honesty about where you are. Honesty about where you're headed, and the guts to admit, this isn't it. That moment when you realize you can't stay the same. That's where everything starts. Not when it's comfortable, not when it's convenient, but when it's necessary. I was scared out of my mind, but I moved anyway, and that decision changed everything. Chapter 2. Move Anyway. I've always been the youngest. When I started kindergarten, I was only 4 years old. From that point on, it seemed like everybody around me was older, bigger, more mature, and further ahead. All through school, that was my reality. When I graduated high school, I was still only 17 years old. My birthday isn't until December, so while most of my classmates were already adults, I wouldn't turn 18 for another 6 months. Looking back, I realized just how young I really was. But at the time, I thought I knew everything. The truth was, I was clueless. I didn't know how the world worked or how to manage money. I didn't know how to build a career or even how to navigate adulthood. What I did know was that staying where I wasn't an option. So I moved anyway. That's a lesson life has taught me over and over again. Most people think successful people are confident before they act. They're not. Most people think leaders know exactly what they're doing before they take the first step. They don't. Most people think courage means not being afraid. It doesn't. The people who get ahead are usually the ones who move before they feel ready. They move while they're scared or while they're uncertain. They move while they're still figuring things out. And that's exactly what I had to do. When I left home, I wasn't prepared. I didn't have all the answers or a perfect plan. I had a destination. And sometimes that's enough. I found myself in that same position many times throughout my life, standing at the edge of something new, questioning myself, wondering if I was ready or if I had what it takes. Then I learned something important. Ready is a feeling. Action is a decision, and decisions will take you farther than feelings ever will. I remember when I went to jump school in the Marine Corps. For those who don't know, jump school is where you learn to jump out of perfectly good airplanes. Physically, I knew I could do it. I was in shape. I had prepared. I could handle the training. But there was one problem. I was afraid of heights. And the command made it clear. If I failed, I wouldn't get another chance. No second attempt. No do-over. No safety net. Pass or fail. That's pressure. Suddenly, all the physical preparation didn't matter. The real battle was happening between my ears. Every fear started talking. What if I freeze? What if I can't do it? What if I embarrass myself? What if I fail? But another voice kept speaking too. What if you can? What if you're stronger than you think? What if the fear is lying to you? When the day came, I stepped onto that aircraft. I wasn't fearless. I wasn't completely confident. I wasn't excited. I was nervous. But I moved anyway. And then something happened. The thing I feared became the thing I loved. I didn't just pass jump school. I excelled. I enjoyed it. The experience taught me something I've carried for the rest of my life. Just because you don't think you're ready doesn't mean you're not. Sometimes your mind hasn't caught up to the person you've already become. You've put in the work. You've prepared. You've trained. You've learned. But fear keeps telling you that you aren't enough. Fear is a liar. Fear will always focus on what could go wrong. Faith focuses on what could go right. The difference between successful people and unsuccessful people often isn't talent. It's movement. One person waits. The other person goes. One person keeps preparing forever. The other person executes. One person waits for certainty. The other person moves despite uncertainty. Every major breakthrough in my life came from moving before I felt ready. Joining the Marine Corps, going to combat, becoming a drill instructor, starting a business, writing books, speaking on stages. None of those moments came with guarantees. None of them came with certainty. They came with fear, but they also came with action. That's the lesson. If you've prepared yourself mentally and you've prepared yourself physically, trust your preparation. Trust your training. Trust your discipline. At some point, you have to stop asking if you're ready and start proving that you are, because courage isn't waiting for fear to disappear. Courage is taking the next step while fear is still riding in the passenger seat. Move anyway. The door won't open until you walk toward it. The opportunity won't reveal itself until you take the step. The life you're looking for is on the other side of action. Not certainty, action. Move anyway. Chapter 3. Kill the Excuse. Over the years, I've learned something about excuses. I hate them. Not because I've never made them. I hate them because I have. I know exactly how powerful excuses can be because I used to carry them around like a shield. Every excuse gave me permission to stay where I was. It gave me someone else to blame, and it gave me a reason not to take responsibility. And for a while, they worked. At least that's what I thought. One of my favorite sayings today is simple. If you want something bad enough, you'll find a way. If not, you'll find an excuse. I believe that because I've lived both sides of it. When I was younger, I had an excuse for everything. I wasn't where other people were because I didn't have the same advantages. I wasn't succeeding because I didn't have the same opportunities. I wasn't moving forward because my life had been harder than theirs. At least that's what I told myself. I blamed growing up without structure, my parents' divorce, being younger than everyone else, the environment, the circumstances. I blamed everything except the one person looking back at me in the mirror. Me. The truth is that excuses are comfortable. They're warm, they're familiar. They allow you to stay exactly where you are while convincing yourself it's not your fault. The problem is that excuses never build anything. They don't make you stronger or pay your bills. They don't improve your life or help you move forward. They simply explain why you're standing still. One day I realized something. The very things I was using as excuses were actually my advantages. The things I thought were holding me back were the same things making me stronger. Growing up without everything handed to me, that taught me resourcefulness. Being younger than everyone else, that taught me how to compete. Having to figure things out on my own, that taught me independence. Living through chaos, that taught me resilience. The hardships I hated were preparing me for battles the other people weren't ready for. While I was busy complaining about what I didn't have, I failed to see what I had gained. Durability, toughness, adaptability, the ability to survive, the ability to keep moving when things got hard, the ability to take a punch and keep fighting. Life wasn't weakening me, it was training me. But as long as I called it an excuse, I couldn't see it as a strength. That's the danger of excuses. They blind you to your own power. Some people spend their entire lives pointing at what happened to them. I understand that temptation. I've been there. But eventually, you have to decide. Do you want to be right about your excuses, or do you want results? Because you usually can't have both. You can spend years proving why life has been unfair, or you can spend those years building a better future. One changes nothing. The other changes everything. The Marine Corps taught me something important. Nobody cares about your excuses when the mission has to get done. The objective doesn't disappear because you're tired. The challenge doesn't get easier because you're scared. The enemy doesn't stop because you're having a bad day. The mission remains, and so does life. Life doesn't stop demanding action because your circumstances are difficult. It keeps moving. The question is whether you'll move with it. Today, when I hear myself starting to make an excuse, I catch it immediately. I don't negotiate with it. I don't entertain it. I kill it. Excuses are like weeds. If you let them grow, they'll choke everything around them. They'll choke your dreams, your goals, your potential, and eventually, they'll choke your future. That's why you have to pull them out by the roots, every single one, no matter how justified they sound, no matter how reasonable they appear or how true they may be. Even a true excuse is still an excuse. Excuses don't build champions. Action does. The day I stopped asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and started asking, "What am I going to do about it?" was the day my life changed. I stopped seeing obstacles as barriers. I started seeing them as training. I stopped seeing disadvantages. I started seeing preparation. I stopped making excuses. I started making things happen. And that's the difference. Excuses explain the past. Action creates the future. So kill the excuse. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. Because the life you want is waiting on the other side of the story you've been telling yourself about why you can't have it. Chapter 4. No Perfect Time. One thing I learned at a very young age is this: there is no perfect time. Most people spend their lives waiting for the right opportunity, waiting until they have more money, waiting until they have more confidence, waiting until they know enough, waiting until they feel ready, waiting until the stars align. The problem is that life doesn't work that way. The perfect time never shows up. The conditions are never ideal. The circumstances are never exactly right. And if you keep waiting for everything to be perfect, you'll spend your entire life standing still. I've seen it happen. I've watched people talk about starting a business for 10 years and never take the first step. I've watched people talk about writing a book for decades and never write the first chapter. I've watched people talk about getting healthy, getting out of debt, changing careers, strengthening relationships, and chasing dreams they never pursue. Not because they couldn't, but because they were waiting for a moment that doesn't exist. The truth is, every major decision I've ever made came with uncertainty. When I decided to join the Marine Corps, it wasn't the perfect time. When I left home, it wasn't the perfect time. When I started a business, it wasn't the perfect time. When I wrote my first book, it wasn't the perfect time. Every single one of those decisions came with risk. They came with doubt. They came with unanswered questions. But I started anyway. I've learned something about ideas. They have an expiration date. A dream can excite you today and disappear tomorrow. A vision can be crystal clear today and become cloudy next week. A burst of motivation can hit you this morning and be gone by tonight. That's why action matters. When the idea comes, move. When the opportunity appears, move. When the vision becomes clear, move. Because if you don't, hesitation starts talking, doubt starts talking, fear starts talking. And before long, the very thing that excited you becomes another dream sitting on a shelf collecting dust. I've learned that motivation is a spark. Discipline is the fuel. Motivation gets you started. Discipline keeps you going. That's why so many people fail. They're waiting to feel motivated every day. That's not how success works. Success works because of structure, because of order, and because of discipline. In the military, we didn't accomplish missions because we felt like it. We accomplished missions because we had systems. We had routines. We had standards. We had discipline. Some days we were motivated. Some days we weren't. The mission didn't care. It still had to be completed. Life is no different. The people who succeed aren't necessarily smarter or more talented or more gifted. They simply learned to act before they felt ready and continued after the excitement faded. That's discipline. Anybody can start when they're excited. Champions continue when they're not. That's why I tell people, don't wait for perfect. Perfect is the enemy of progress. Start with what you have. Start where you are. Start before you think you're ready. Then build momentum, because momentum is powerful. A book gets written one page at a time. A business gets built one customer at a time. A body gets transformed one workout at a time. A life gets changed one decision at a time. Not all at once, one step at a time. Looking back over my life, I can honestly say that most of the opportunities I've had came simply because I was willing to start before I was ready. Not because I had all the answers, or because I had guarantees. Not because I had perfect timing. I simply moved. That movement created opportunities that standing still never could. So if you're waiting for the perfect time, stop. It's not coming. The perfect time isn't next year. The perfect time isn't when you're more confident. The perfect time isn't when everything makes sense. That time is now. Every day you wait is a day you'll never get back. Every dream you delay gets a little farther away. Start now. Adjust along the way. Stay disciplined and let momentum do what waiting never will. Chapter 5. Do It Scared. The first time I jumped out of an airplane, I was terrified. Not nervous, not uncomfortable, terrified. People hear that I've been to jump school and assume I wasn't afraid. They're wrong. I was afraid before I ever stepped onto the aircraft. I was afraid while putting on the parachute. I was afraid while checking my equipment. And I was definitely afraid when that airplane door opened. Before we boarded the aircraft, the instructors gave us a briefing. One statement stuck with me. The only person coming down with the airplane is the pilot. That wasn't meant to comfort anybody. It was meant to make one thing crystal clear. Everybody else was jumping. There was no backup plan, no alternative route, no option to ride back down. You were going out that door. The only question was how. The Marines were grouped together. The Army was grouped together. The Navy was grouped together. The Air Force was grouped together, just like you'd expect. When we got on the aircraft, we sat along the sides facing each other. The Marines were loud, talking, yelling, barking, doing what Marines do. I was right there with them, because here's what nobody knew. Underneath all that noise, I was scared. Every bit as scared as anyone else on that plane. I had my main parachute on my back, my reserve parachute on my front, and my static line connected to the aircraft. The static line was designed to pull the parachute automatically once I exited the plane. That way, if fear took over, the parachute would still deploy. At least somebody had thought ahead. As the aircraft climbed higher, we waited. Then I saw the red light. Red means nobody moves. Nobody jumps. You just sit there and think. Sometimes, thinking is the worst thing you can do, because that's when fear starts talking. What if something goes wrong? What if the parachute doesn't open? What if I freeze? What if I fail? The longer you think, the louder those questions become. Then the aircraft reached the drop zone. The door opened, and suddenly fear became real. Now you could see the ground. You could see exactly what you were about to do. I remember an Army major sitting nearby. He looked over at me and said, "Corporal Knight, you Marines are crazy. I'm scared." I laughed. Then I told him the truth. "Sir, I'm scared too." Because courage isn't pretending. Courage isn't acting tough. Courage is admitting you're scared and moving anyway. A few moments later, the jump master started the sequence. "Stand up." Everybody stood. "Hook up." We connected our static lines. "Check equipment." Everybody checked. Then it happened. The light turned green. Green means go. No more thinking. No more analyzing. No more debating. Go. One jumper at a time moved toward the door, and standing in front of me was a young Army soldier named Martinez. When your turn comes, you're supposed to sound off with your jump number and exit the aircraft. Simple. At least it sounds simple on the ground. Martinez got to the door. The jump master slapped her on the back. "Go." She didn't move. He hit her again. "Go." Still nothing. Fear had locked her up. Then something happened I'll never forget. The jump master grabbed a pull-up bar mounted overhead. For weeks, I'd wondered why that bar was there. I was about to find out. He swung himself up, planted his boot squarely in her back, and launched her out of that airplane. The last thing I heard was a scream disappearing into the sky. At that moment, I learned 2 lessons. First, fear is real. Second, the jump is happening whether you're ready or not. Then it was my turn. I stepped to the door. The wind hit me. The ground looked a million miles away. And honestly, I wasn't thinking about courage or about leadership or about motivation. I was thinking one thing. I didn't want this jump master kicking me out of this airplane. So I yelled my jump number, November 203, and I jumped. The fear didn't disappear. I jumped with it. A few seconds later, the parachute opened perfectly. The ride was smooth. The landing was good. And the thing that had terrified me for weeks was over. Just like that. What I discovered that day has stayed with me for the rest of my life. Fear almost always looks bigger before you act. Once you jump, it starts shrinking. Most people spend years standing at the door, looking, thinking, worrying, analyzing, waiting. The successful people aren't necessarily less afraid. They're just willing to jump. And here's the part that matters most. I wasn't successful because I was fearless. I was successful because I was prepared. The training worked. The equipment worked. The process worked. My preparation carried me through the fear. That's why preparation is so important. When you've prepared mentally, physically, and emotionally, you don't have to trust your feelings. You can trust your training. The lesson isn't that fear disappears. The lesson is that fear doesn't get the final vote. You'll be scared sometimes. You'll doubt yourself sometimes. You'll question whether you're ready. Do it anyway. Step toward the door anyway. Trust your preparation. Trust your discipline. Trust the work you've already put in. Because courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is hearing fear scream in your ear and jumping anyway. And more often than not, you'll discover what I did. The thing you were afraid of wasn't nearly as dangerous as staying on the plane. Chapter 6. Action builds confidence. Most people think confidence comes first. They're wrong. They think confident people take action. What I've learned is that action creates confidence. The first time I spoke in front of an audience, I was nervous as hell. It was at an elementary school. I was scheduled to give the same presentation 3 different times that day. Before I ever stepped in front of those students, my mind was racing. What if I mess up? What if I forget what I'm supposed to say? What if they don't listen? What if I embarrass myself? Those thoughts hit me like fear hits everyone else. I don't care if you're a Marine, a business owner, an athlete, or a speaker. Fear doesn't discriminate. It shows up for everybody. The difference is what you do when it arrives. I remember standing in front of that first group. My mouth felt dry. My heart was racing. I was nervous. I stumbled over words. I leaned heavily on my slides because they felt like a safety net. Every time I lost my place, I'd look back at the screen. Every time I got nervous, I'd go back to the slides. I made it through. Not perfectly, but I made it through. Then came the second presentation. Something was different. The fear was still there, but it wasn't as loud. I had already survived once. I knew I could get through it again. I wasn't relying on the slides as much. I started speaking more naturally. The words started flowing a little easier. The pauses became smoother. The delivery became stronger. By the third presentation, it felt completely different. I wasn't hiding behind the slides anymore. I was talking, connecting, telling stories. I was ad-libbing and it was flowing smoothly. I was actually enjoying it. The same thing that had terrified me just a few hours earlier suddenly felt natural. What changed? Not the audience, not the room, not the material. Me. More specifically, my confidence. But the confidence didn't come before the presentations. The confidence came because of the presentations. That's how confidence works. Confidence isn't built by thinking or reading or planning. Confidence is built by doing. You gain confidence by proving to yourself that you can survive the thing you're afraid of. The first workout builds confidence. The first sales call builds confidence. The first speech builds confidence. The first business builds confidence. The first book builds confidence. The first step builds confidence. Too many people are waiting to feel confident before they start. That's backwards. If I had waited until I felt completely confident before speaking, I'd probably still be waiting. If I had waited until I felt confident enough to write a book, the pages would still be blank. If I had waited until I felt confident enough to start a business, there would be no business. Confidence is earned, and the price of admission is action. That's something I learned in the military. Nobody becomes confident in combat by reading about combat or leading Marines by reading leadership books. You become confident by doing the work, by making mistakes, by learning lessons, by adjusting, by improving, by repeating. Eventually, what once felt impossible becomes normal. What once scared you becomes routine. What once made your hands shake becomes second nature. The confidence doesn't arrive overnight. It arrives one repetition at a time, one action at a time, one experience at a time. Looking back, that school presentation wasn't really about public speaking. It was about growth, learning to trust myself, and discovering that I already had everything I needed. I just needed experience. And experience only comes through action. That's why I tell people this. Don't wait until you feel confident. Act, then let confidence catch up. Confidence is not a prerequisite for success. It's a byproduct of action. Every time you step forward, confidence grows. Every time you face fear, confidence grows. Every time you keep your word to yourself, confidence grows. The person you want to become is built through repetition, not perfection, repetition. So take the first step. Take the shaky step. Take the uncomfortable step. Take the imperfect step. Because every step you take is a vote for the person you're becoming. And one day you'll look back and realize that confidence wasn't something you found. It was something you built, one action at a time. Chapter 7. Hesitation is the enemy. My grandmother used to tell me something when I was growing up. She'd say, God gives us all talents. If you don't use them, you'll lose them. At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. As I've gotten older, I've thought about those words more and more. Today, I believe life is a school. Every challenge, every obstacle, every setback, every victory, every lesson, they're all part of our education. They're all preparing us for something. I believe we're each given experiences that shape us into who we're meant to become. Some lessons teach us strength. Others teach us patience, humility, and courage. And if we're paying attention, those lessons start pointing us toward our purpose. Not always in the same way, not always on the same timeline, but in the direction we're supposed to go. I also believe we're given gifts, talents, abilities, experiences, and opportunities to use them. What we do with those opportunities is up to us. We have free agency. We can act, or we can hesitate, and that's where a lot of people get stuck. Years ago, I had a young lady working out at my gym. She had a child on the autism spectrum. Because of her experiences, she had developed a passion for helping children with sensory needs. One day, she told me she wanted to open a sensory gym. I thought it was a great idea, not only because the community needed it, but because she already had the tools. She understood the challenges these children faced and how to work with them. She understood the families and the mission. And from my side, I understood the gym business. I knew operations and the systems. I knew what it would take to get started. So I told her, let's do it. Let's build something. Let's make it happen. Let's serve these families. Let's create a place where these kids can thrive. At first, she was excited, but then something happened. Every week, there was a new reason not to start, a new obstacle, a new delay, a new excuse. First, it was timing. Then it was money. Then it was something else. Then another reason, and another, and another. Every conversation ended the same way. We'll do it later. The problem with later is that later never arrives. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into a year. Nothing happened. Then one day, something interesting happened. Another sensory gym opened. Not somewhere else. Not across town. In the exact area we had discussed. Someone else stepped in and built the very thing she had been talking about. The opportunity didn't disappear. It simply found someone willing to act. Now, whether you see that through faith, purpose, or coincidence doesn't really matter. The lesson remains the same. The need and opportunity were still there. The children still needed help. Someone eventually answered the call. It just wasn't the person who talked about it first. That experience taught me something powerful. Ideas are common. Execution is rare. Dreams are common. Action is rare. Vision is common. Commitment is rare. Many people receive an idea. Few people act on it. Many people feel inspired. Few people move. Many people see an opportunity. Few people seize it. That's why hesitation is dangerous. It disguises itself as preparation. It disguises itself as caution or responsibility, but often it's just fear wearing a different uniform. Fear says, what if I fail? Hesitation says, maybe next month. Fear says, what if I'm not ready? Hesitation says, I need a little more time. Fear says, what if it doesn't work? Hesitation says, let me think about it. The language changes. The results stay the same. Nothing happens, and every day you hesitate, someone else is moving. Someone else is learning. Someone else is growing. Someone else is building. Someone else is becoming. I learned a long time ago that opportunities have a shelf life. The moment won't stay forever. The door won't stay open forever. The invitation won't remain forever. Eventually, life moves on. The question is whether you'll move with it. Looking back over my life, the greatest opportunities I've had didn't come because I was the smartest person in the room. They came because I was willing to act before I had all the answers. I was willing to move before I felt ready. I was willing to trust the lessons I'd learned. I was willing to step forward while others were still debating. That's why hesitation is the enemy. Not because it feels dangerous, because it feels safe. It lulls you to sleep. It convinces you there's always more time. It whispers that tomorrow is guaranteed. But tomorrow isn't guaranteed. Today is. Right now is. The opportunity in front of you is. So use your gifts. Use your talents. Use your experiences. Use what you've been given. Because the life you're meant to build won't be created through hesitation. It will be created through action. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. The people who change their lives aren't always the most talented. They're the ones who stop hesitating long enough to begin. Chapter 8. Start ugly. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing they need everything figured out before they start. They want the perfect plan, the perfect building, the perfect equipment, the perfect logo, the perfect website, the perfect timing, the perfect conditions. The problem is that perfection doesn't exist. And while they're waiting for perfect, someone else is getting started. I learned that lesson when I started Rage Fitness. What people see today isn't what I started with. Today, people walk into the gym and see equipment everywhere. Heavy bags, weights, machines, conditioning equipment, everything needed to train. When they look around, they assume it started that way. It didn't. Not even close. When Rage Fitness started, all I really had was a hope, a dream, discipline, and tenacity. That's it. I had 2 heavy bags, 4 medicine balls, and a vision. No fancy facility. No massive inventory of equipment. No guarantee that it would work. Just a belief that if I kept moving forward, something good would happen. So I started where I was. I rented space wherever I could. I ran boot camps. I trained people. I showed up. I worked. I served. I learned. I adapted. And I kept going. Was it pretty? No. Was it polished? No. Was it perfect? Not even close. But it was started. And that's what mattered. Most people never realize that success doesn't begin with abundance. It begins with action. The resources often show up after you've proven you're serious. Looking back now, I honestly can't explain where all the equipment came from. Some of it I bought, a lot was donated, and some came through discounts. Some equipment showed up through opportunities, and some of it was brand new. Over the years, I felt like one thing kept leading to another. Almost as if the universe kept rewarding movement. Every time I took a step, another opportunity appeared. Every time I invested in the business, something else showed up. Every time I committed, another door opened. But none of that would have happened if I had waited. None of it would have happened if I had sat around wishing instead of working. The opportunities came because I was already moving. That's something I've noticed throughout life. Movement attracts momentum. Action attracts opportunity. People want support after they start, but often support comes because they started. The world tends to respond to people who are already in motion. Another thing I learned is that your first idea usually isn't your final destination. When this gym first opened, it wasn't even a fitness gym. It was a fight gym. We were training fighters. We had MMA and USA boxing. We had athletes competing. We had fighters appearing on television. That was the focus. That's what we thought the future would be. But something interesting happened. The people spoke. The market spoke. The community spoke. And because we were willing to listen, we evolved. Over time, the gym became more focused on fitness, on conditioning, transformation, and on helping everyday people improve their lives. The business changed. The mission expanded. The audience guided us. And that's exactly how growth works. You don't have to know exactly where you'll end up. You just have to start moving. As you move, you'll learn. As you learn, you'll adjust. As you adjust, you'll improve. As you improve, you'll grow. Too many people refuse to begin because they can't see the entire path. But the entire path isn't supposed to be visible. You discover it one step at a time. Imagine if I had waited until I could afford every piece of equipment, or if I had waited until I had the perfect building, or if I had waited until I knew exactly what the gym would become. Rage Fitness probably wouldn't exist because success wasn't created by having everything. Success was created by starting with something. That's the lesson. Start where you are, with what you have, and with what you know. Don't worry if it's ugly or small, or if it doesn't look impressive. Every successful business started small. Every successful speaker started nervous. Every successful author started with a blank page. Every successful athlete started as a beginner. Nobody skips the starting point. The difference is that successful people accept it. They embrace it. They understand that ugly beginnings often create beautiful endings. So stop worrying about how it looks. Stop worrying about what people think. Stop worrying about whether it's perfect. Start, adjust, grow, repeat, because the greatest mistake isn't starting ugly. It is never starting at all. Chapter 9. Momentum over motivation. Motivation is overrated. Now don't get me wrong. Motivation is great when it's there. It can get you started. It can light a fire. It can create excitement. But motivation is also unreliable. It comes and goes. Some days it's strong. Some days it's nowhere to be found. That's why I've learned not to depend on motivation. I've learned to depend on momentum. For years, I've been getting up around 3:30 in the morning, not because I always want to or because I'm always motivated, but because the mission requires it. The alarm goes off, the day starts, and the work begins. People see the gym, they see the classes, they see the transformations, they see the results. What they don't see are the thousands of mornings that came before those results. The early wake-ups, the long days, the late nights, the planning, the programming, the coaching, the problem-solving, the responsibilities. Being a gym owner isn't just showing up and working out. It's creating workout plans, building programs, coaching people through struggles, keeping the lights on, managing schedules, helping people stay accountable, finding solutions, making decisions, then doing it all again tomorrow. After a while, even something you love can start feeling repetitive. You show up before sunrise, you leave after dark, you lock the doors, you drive home, and then the thought hits you. I've got to do this all over again tomorrow. That's not a motivational problem. That's a reality problem. Eventually, every dream becomes work. Every passion becomes responsibility. Every business becomes a system. And when that happens, motivation starts fading. That's where a lot of people quit. They mistake the loss of excitement for the loss of purpose. They think because they don't feel motivated anymore, something must be wrong. Nothing is wrong. You're simply entering a new phase. The phase where discipline takes over, where commitment matters more than emotion. The phase where momentum becomes your greatest asset. For me, one of the ways I maintain momentum is by creating new challenges, new goals, new projects, new mountains to climb. That's why I started looking at other opportunities. A supplement company, a clothing line, books, speaking. Each of these were different ways to grow, different ways to create, and different ways to learn. Not because I was abandoning the gym, because I was feeding the fire. I was creating fresh momentum. Momentum creates energy. It creates excitement. It reminds you that you're still growing. The danger isn't hard work. It is stagnation. When people stop growing, they start drifting. When people stop learning, they start coasting. When people stop challenging themselves, they start losing enthusiasm. That's why momentum matters. Momentum keeps you engaged, keeps you moving, and creates opportunities that motivation never could. Think about a train. The hardest part isn't keeping it moving. The hardest part is getting it moving. Once it's rolling, momentum does most of the work. Your life works the same way. The first workout is hard. The 100th workout is easier. The first chapter is hard. The 10th chapter is easier. The first customer is hard. The 100th customer is easier. The first speech is hard. The 50th speech is easier. Momentum makes difficult things manageable, but you have to keep feeding it. You have to keep growing. You have to keep setting goals. You have to keep finding reasons to move forward. Because if you're waiting to feel motivated every day, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Nobody feels motivated every day. Not entrepreneurs, not athletes, not Marines, not authors, not leaders. What separates them isn't motivation. It's their ability to keep moving when motivation disappears. I've learned that motivation starts the engine. Discipline keeps it running. Momentum keeps it moving. And once you have momentum, amazing things begin to happen. One success leads to another. One opportunity leads to another. One win creates another win. That's why I focus less on motivation and more on movement. Because movement creates momentum, and momentum creates possibilities. So if you're struggling to stay motivated, stop asking yourself how to get motivated. Ask yourself a better question. What's one thing I can do today to create momentum? One phone call, one workout, one page, one meeting, one step. Because momentum isn't built in giant leaps. It's built through consistent movement, day after day, week after week, year after year. And eventually, the momentum you create will carry you farther than motivation ever could. When motivation fades, and it will, let momentum take the wheel. Chapter 10. Discipline decides. Motivation gets you started. Discipline gets you finished. I've learned that lesson over and over again throughout my life. People love motivation because motivation feels good. It's exciting. It's emotional. It's powerful. Motivation makes you believe anything is possible. The problem is that motivation has a short shelf life. Eventually, reality shows up. Eventually, the excitement fades. Eventually, the results don't happen as quickly as you expected. That's when discipline takes over. I remember when I started Salute Supplements. I was fired up. I had a vision. I had a mission. I believed I was bringing something different to the marketplace. Something cleaner, something better, and something I personally believed in. Products with cleaner ingredients, natural sweeteners, quality formulas, products I would use myself. I remember thinking, people are going to love this. I could see it in my mind. The protein, the creatine, the amino acids, the pre-workouts. I thought people would immediately recognize the difference. I thought they would see the value. I thought they would be lining up to buy it. Then reality showed up. The sales were slow, painfully slow. Honestly, it was shocking. I couldn't understand it. I kept thinking, this is exactly what I would want. This is exactly what I would buy. Why isn't everybody excited about this? The answer was simple. The market didn't care what I thought. It cared about what it wanted. And those are two very different things. The supplement industry is crowded, extremely crowded. Every company claims to have the best product, the best ingredients, and they claim to have the best results. Consumers are bombarded with opinions every single day. What I believed was important wasn't always what the customer believed was important. That was a hard lesson. I even took my products directly to customers. I put them beside competing brands. I let people compare them. I explained the ingredients. I explained the formulas. I explained why they were different. And sometimes people still chose something else. Not because my products were bad, because they wanted something different. Some wanted more caffeine. Some wanted stronger stimulants. Some wanted whatever their favorite influencer was promoting. Some wanted whatever tasted the sweetest. Some wanted whatever had the biggest marketing budget. Everybody had their reasons, and suddenly I realized something. Success wasn't about convincing everyone. It was about finding my people, finding the customers who valued what I valued, finding the people looking for clean products, finding the people looking for quality over hype, finding the people who understood the mission. That changed everything. Instead of getting frustrated, I got focused. Instead of quitting, I adjusted. Instead of complaining, I learned. And that's where discipline stepped in, because there were plenty of days when the motivation disappeared. Plenty of days when I questioned whether it was worth it. Plenty of days when I wondered if I should focus my energy somewhere else. When sales are slow, motivation leaves quickly. When people reject your product, motivation leaves quickly. And when the results don't match the effort, motivation leaves quickly. That's why discipline matters. Discipline doesn't care how you feel or whether you're excited. It doesn't even care whether you're discouraged. Discipline simply says, keep going. That's it. Keep going. One more call, one more post, one more conversation, one more event, one more opportunity, one more day. The people who succeed aren't always the most talented. They're often the most disciplined. They stay in the fight longer. They keep showing up. They keep learning. They keep adjusting. They keep moving. Long after everyone else has quit. I've noticed that discipline has a way of revealing the truth. If you stay disciplined long enough, one of two things happens. Either the goal wasn't worth pursuing and you learn a valuable lesson, or the breakthrough eventually arrives. You'll never know which one it is if you quit too soon. Most people stop right before things begin to turn around. They mistake a temporary struggle for permanent failure. They mistake resistance for rejection. They mistake slow progress for no progress. Discipline sees things differently. That success often takes longer than expected. That mastery requires repetition. And that results are earned, not given. Looking back, I'm grateful the supplement company wasn't an overnight success. Because it taught me patience. It taught me persistence. It taught me how to listen to the market instead of my ego. Most importantly, it reinforced a lesson I've learned throughout my life. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is intentional. Motivation comes and goes. Discipline stays. Motivation starts races. Discipline finishes them. At the end of the day, it isn't the person with the most motivation who wins. It's the person who stays committed long after the motivation is gone. Because when the excitement fades, discipline decides. Chapter 11. Execute relentlessly. One of the hardest moments in business is when you do everything right and nothing happens. You advertise, you prepare, you show up, you put in the work, and then nobody comes. I remember those days when I was building Rage Fitness. Back then, we were running boot camps, pro-fit classes, box fit classes, boxing programs, and fitness programs. I'd spend time putting together the workouts, creating the flyers, advertising the classes, promoting them online, talking to people, building excitement, getting everything ready. Then class time would arrive and nobody showed up. Just me standing there, waiting, looking at the clock, looking at the door, waiting for someone to walk in. It's a lonely feeling, a scary feeling, because your mind immediately starts attacking you. Maybe people aren't interested anymore. Maybe the momentum is gone. Maybe nobody's coming back. Maybe I have to start over. Maybe this thing is finished. Those thoughts can be dangerous. Not because they're true, but because they're believable. That's when most people quit. Not when they're losing, when they're uncertain. The human mind hates uncertainty. It wants immediate proof, immediate results, immediate validation. But success rarely works that way. Success often requires you to keep going long before you receive evidence that it's working. I've experienced that with almost everything I've built. I've experienced it with the gym. I've experienced it with Salute supplements. I've experienced it with clothing. I've experienced it with the Bod Pod. I've experienced it with speaking. I've experienced it with writing. Every venture eventually hits a point where the excitement slows down. The numbers flatten out. The momentum stalls. You're forced to answer one question. Are you committed, or were you just excited? Because excitement disappears. Commitment remains. That's why I learned to become relentless. Not emotional, not reactive, relentless. Relentless means you keep advertising when nobody responds, that you keep posting when nobody likes it. Relentless means you keep showing up when attendance drops. It means you keep building when nobody notices and that you keep believing before the results arrive. I've always believed in what some people call the law of averages. If you continue doing the right things consistently, eventually the numbers begin to work in your favor. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. If you talk to enough people, someone says yes. If you help enough people, someone tells others. If you provide enough value, someone notices. If you stay in the game long enough, opportunities appear. The problem is that most people quit before the averages have time to work. They stop after the first disappointment, the first setback, the first slow month, the first failed launch, the first empty class. But the people who win understand something important. The breakthrough is often hiding behind the boredom, the repetition, and the days when nothing seems to be happening. I've learned that consistency compounds, just like interest in a bank account. One day doesn't look like much. 1 week doesn't look like much. Sometimes 1 year doesn't even look like much. But eventually, all those efforts stack on top of one another, and suddenly people say, "You're lucky." No, luck didn't build it. Consistency built it. Relentlessness built it. Persistence built it. The willingness to keep going when there is no evidence that anything was working built it. That's the part people don't see. They see the gym after it's all established. They see the products after they're on the shelves. They see the books after they're published. They see the success after it's visible. What they don't see are the empty rooms, the unanswered phone calls, the slow sales, the doubts, the frustrations, the countless days where quitting would have been easier. But here's what I've discovered. The people who ultimately succeed aren't necessarily more talented. They aren't necessarily smarter. They aren't necessarily better connected. They simply stay in the fight longer. They execute relentlessly. When things slow down, they keep moving. When things get difficult, they keep moving. When things become uncertain, they keep moving. Because they understand something most people never learn. Success isn't built through occasional effort. It's built through relentless execution. Day after day, month after month, year after year, until eventually the world catches up to the work you've been doing all along. So when things get quiet, keep going. When attendance drops, keep going. When sales slow down, keep going. When nobody notices, keep going. Because every step forward counts. Every effort matters. Every action compounds. And if you're relentless enough, persistent enough, and disciplined enough, the results eventually have no choice but to show up. Not because you got lucky, because you refused to stop. Chapter 12. Fall Forward. Most people are afraid of failure. I understand why. Failure hurts. It's embarrassing. It's expensive. It's humbling. Sometimes it feels like everything you've worked for is slipping through your fingers. I've experienced that feeling. When I first opened Rage Fitness, it was called Rage Boxing and Fitness. I had partners. I had a vision. I had excitement. I had big plans. And I thought everything was going to work out. It didn't. In fact, it went about as wrong as it could go. I talked about the details in my first book, but the short version is this. I ended up getting sued for $650,000. Everything fell apart. Everything I had worked for seemed to disappear overnight. I lost almost everything. And suddenly I found myself standing in a place that many entrepreneurs eventually face. The place where you have to decide whether failure is the end of the story or simply another chapter. I won't pretend it wasn't easy. It wasn't. There were moments when it felt overwhelming. Moments when I questioned everything. Moments when it would have been easier to walk away. But after emotions settled down, I realized something. I had lost a lot, but I hadn't lost everything. I still had knowledge. I still had experience. I still had equipment. I still had lessons. I still had the ability to work. Most importantly, I still had the willingness to move. So that's what I did. I found another location. I implemented what I had learned. I took the pieces that still worked and built from there. Not because I felt confident. Not because I had guarantees. Because moving forward was the only option that made sense. Looking back now, I wouldn't remove that experience from my life, even if I could. That's probably hard for some people to understand. Why would anyone be grateful for a failure like that? Because of what it taught me. Some lessons can only be learned through experience. Some lessons can't be found in a classroom. They can't be found in a book. They can't be found on YouTube. They can only be learned through practical application, through mistakes, through setbacks, through consequences, through reality. That failure taught me about partnerships. It taught me about business, leadership, contracts, risk, and responsibility. Most importantly, it taught me that I could survive. And that's a lesson worth learning. Because once you've survived a major setback, you stop fearing smaller ones. You realize that failure isn't fatal. It's educational. The same thing has happened throughout my business journey. I've launched campaigns that didn't work. I've advertised classes that nobody attended. I've put together boot camps that barely got off the ground. I've invested time, money, and energy into ideas that never produced the results I expected. Every entrepreneur has. Every successful person has. The difference is how they respond. Some people see failure and stop. Others see failure and study it. They ask, what worked? What didn't? What can I improve? What lesson did this teach me? How do I do it better next time? That's the difference between failing and falling forward. Failing becomes permanent when you quit. Falling forward happens when you learn. Every mistake becomes a lesson. Every setback becomes information. Every disappointment becomes preparation. I've learned that life rarely wastes pain. If you're willing to pay attention, every struggle has something to teach you. The problem is that most people are so focused on the disappointment that they miss the lesson. They're so busy looking at what they lost that they never noticed what they gained. Experience, wisdom, perspective, strength, resilience. The ability to recognize problems before they happen again. Those things have value, real value. The truth is, some of my greatest successes were built on top of previous failures. Not because failure is magical, because failure forced me to grow. It forced me to improve. It forced me to become better. And growth is almost always uncomfortable. That's why I tell people not to fear failure. Fear standing still. Fear refusing to learn. Fear repeating the same mistake because you're too proud to admit it happened. But don't fear failure. Failure is a teacher. A harsh teacher sometimes, an expensive teacher sometimes, but a teacher nonetheless. And if you're willing to learn the lesson, failure can become one of your greatest assets. That's why when life knocks you down, don't stay there. Get up. Take inventory. Study what happened. Adjust your plan. Apply the lesson and keep moving. Successful people don't avoid failure. They fall forward. They turn mistakes into wisdom. They turn losses into lessons. They turn setbacks into comebacks. And eventually, they realize something powerful. The failure they once hated was actually preparing them for the success that was coming next. Chapter 13. Purpose Pulls You Forward. People often ask me how I've stayed consistent for so many years. How do you keep getting up at 3:30 in the morning? How do you keep training people? How do you keep writing books? How do you keep starting businesses? How do you keep pushing when things get hard? The answer isn't motivation or money or recognition. The answer is purpose. Purpose is different. Motivation comes and goes. Purpose stays. Discipline and momentum can carry you for a while, but purpose will carry you through things that motivation and discipline alone cannot. I've discovered that when your purpose is clear, decisions become easier. Not easy, easier. You're no longer asking yourself if you feel like doing something. You're asking yourself whether it serves your mission. When I was younger, I thought success was about proving something. Proving I could make it. Proving people wrong. Proving I was capable. Proving I belonged. Maybe some of that fueled me in the beginning, but eventually that fuel runs out. You can only run on anger for so long. You can only run on proving people wrong for so long. At some point, you need something bigger. For me, that became service. I started realizing that every lesson I'd learned had value. Every mistake, every deployment, every hardship, every business failure, every success, every setback, every scar, every lesson, someone else could benefit from it. That's when purpose became bigger than me. The gym stopped being just about workouts. It became about helping people change their lives. The book stopped being just about telling my story. They became about helping someone else write a better chapter in theirs. The speaking engagements stopped being about standing on a stage. They became about planting seeds, helping people see what's possible, helping people believe in themselves, helping people take action. That's purpose. Purpose takes the spotlight off of you and places it on the people you're serving. And here's what I've learned. When your purpose is only about you, you'll quit when things get difficult. When your purpose involves helping others, quitting becomes harder because people are counting on you. I see it in the gym all the time. There are mornings when I'm tired, mornings when I don't feel like being there, mornings when I'd rather stay in bed. Then I remember there are people who are showing up because they trust me. People who need encouragement, people who need accountability, people who need leadership. Suddenly my feelings don't matter as much. Purpose takes over and reminds me why I started. That's what purpose does. It pulls you forward. It pulls you through setbacks. It pulls you through disappointments. It pulls you through failures. It pulls you through fear. Because purpose gives meaning to the struggle. Without purpose, obstacles feel pointless. With purpose, obstacles become part of the process. I've noticed that the happiest people I know aren't necessarily the richest people. They aren't necessarily the most famous people. They aren't necessarily the people with the easiest lives. They're the people who know why they get up in the morning. They know what they're building. They know who they're serving. They know what they're fighting for. Purpose gives life direction. Without direction, you're drifting. With direction, you're moving. And movement changes everything. I believe every person has gifts. I believe every person has experiences. I believe every person has lessons they've learned that can help someone else. The question is whether they'll use them, because gifts that aren't used eventually fade. Dreams that aren't pursued eventually die. Potential that isn't developed eventually disappears. That's why purpose matters. It calls you to action. It challenges you to grow. It demands that you become more than you currently are. And if you're willing to answer that call, purpose will take you places motivation never could. When motivation quits, purpose remains. When fear shows up, purpose remains. When failure happens, purpose remains. When nobody is watching, purpose remains. Purpose is the rope that keeps pulling you up the mountain when every part of you wants to stop climbing. That's why you have to find yours. Not somebody else's purpose, yours. Once you know your purpose, you'll stop looking for reasons to quit, and you'll start finding reasons to continue. The people who accomplish extraordinary things aren't always the most talented. They're often the people who became obsessed with a purpose bigger than themselves. And that purpose kept pulling them forward long after everyone else stopped. Chapter 14. Leave Footprints. At the end of the day, none of this was ever just about me. Not Rage Fitness, not Salute Supplements, not speaking, not writing books, not any of the businesses I've started, not the successes, not even the failures. It was about leaving footprints. I wanted my kids to have something I didn't always have. I wanted them to have an example. Not a perfect example, a real one. I wanted them to see what it looks like to chase a dream. I wanted them to see what it looks like to fail and keep going. I wanted them to see what it looks like to get knocked down and get back up. I wanted them to see what discipline looks like, what commitment looks like, what perseverance looks like. Because people learn more from what they see than what they hear. You can tell someone to work hard, or you can show them. You can tell someone to be resilient, or you can let them watch you survive difficult times. You can tell someone to never quit, or you can demonstrate it when life gives you every reason to quit. That's why I've always shared my story, not because I think my story is special, but because I know somebody might need it. Somebody might be standing where I once stood, confused, scared, lost, drifting, wondering if they have what it takes, wondering if they should keep going, wondering if all the struggle is worth it. And maybe they'll hear my story and realize they're not alone. Maybe they'll realize that success isn't a straight line. Maybe they'll realize that failure isn't the end. Maybe they'll realize that fear is normal. Maybe they'll realize that action is the answer. Because the truth is, none of this is glamorous. People see the finished product, the gym, the books, the businesses, and the accomplishments. What they don't always see is the struggle behind it. The early mornings, the late nights, the setbacks, the disappointments, the failures, the lawsuits, the empty classes, the slow sales, the uncertainty, the self-doubt, the countless moments when quitting would have been easier. Success isn't built in the spotlight. Success is built in the dark. It's built when nobody is clapping. It's built when nobody is watching. It's built when you're tired. It's built when you're discouraged. It's built when you don't feel like showing up, but you do it anyway. That's what I want people to understand. This journey isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about continuing when things get hard. It's about moving when fear tells you to stop. It's about acting when hesitation tells you to wait. It's about believing when doubt tells you to quit. Every chapter in this book comes back to one simple truth. Action changes everything. My father taught me that decisions have consequences. The Marine Corps taught me that action beats hesitation. Business taught me that discipline beats motivation. Failure taught me that setbacks are lessons. Life taught me that movement creates opportunity. And purpose taught me that the journey is bigger than yourself. When I look back over my life, I don't see a perfect path. I see a trail marked by mistakes, a trail marked by lessons, a trail marked by victories and defeats, a trail marked by courage and fear, a trail marked by action. Those are the footprints, and my hope is that someone follows them, not to become me, not to live my life, but to realize they can build their own. My hope is that my children see those footprints and understand that success isn't something you're given. It's something you earn, one decision at a time, one action at a time, one day at a time. My hope is that they understand that fear isn't a stop sign. Failure isn't a life sentence. Excuses don't build anything, and hesitation steals opportunities. Most of all, I hope they understand that they don't have to be perfect. They just have to move. Because movement creates momentum. Momentum creates growth. Growth creates opportunity. And opportunity creates the life you're capable of living. One day, I'll be gone. The gym will belong to someone else. The businesses may change. The equipment will wear out. The trophies will collect dust. The money will come and go. But the footprints will remain. The lessons will remain. The example will remain. And that's enough. In the end, your greatest accomplishment won't be what you've built. It will be who you inspired to build something after you. So leave footprints. Leave evidence that you were here. Leave proof that you fought through the fear. Leave proof that you kept moving when it would have been easier to quit. Leave proof that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they decide to act. And when your journey is over, make sure the trail behind you is clear enough that someone else can find their way forward. That's how legacies are built, one footprint at a time. Epilogue. Your turn. If you've made it this far, thank you, not just for listening to this book, but for investing in yourself. Because that's really what you've been doing. You haven't been listening to pages. You've been examining your own life, your own decisions, your own fears, your own excuses, your own opportunities. And maybe, somewhere in these chapters, you've seen a little bit of yourself. Maybe you've been drifting. Maybe you've been hesitating. Maybe you've been waiting for the perfect time. Maybe you've been standing at the door of your own airplane, staring at the ground below, wondering if you have what it takes to jump. I understand. I've been there, more than once. The stories in this book aren't stories about a perfect man. They're stories about a man who made a decision, a man who was scared, a man who failed, a man who doubted himself, a man who got knocked down, a man who made mistakes, a lot of mistakes. But they're also stories about a man who kept moving. That's the difference. Not talent, not intelligence, not luck. Movement. When I was 14 years old, I made a decision that changed the course of my life. I decided I wasn't going to drift. I decided I wasn't going to let my circumstances decide my future. I decided to move. That decision led me into the Marine Corps. It led me into combat. It led me into business. It led me into writing. It led me into speaking. It led me into failures I never expected and successes I never imagined. Most importantly, it led me into becoming the person I was capable of becoming. Not because I knew where I was going, because I was willing to start walking. That's what I hope you take away from this book. You don't need all the answers. You don't need perfect timing. You don't need perfect circumstances. You don't need certainty. You need movement. You need action. You need a willingness to take the first step, and then another, and then another. Life has taught me something that took years to understand. Clarity rarely comes before action. Clarity usually comes because of action. The path becomes visible after you start moving, not before. Too many people spend their lives waiting to feel ready, waiting to feel confident, waiting to feel motivated, waiting for fear to disappear, waiting for permission, waiting for someday. Someday is a dangerous place. A lot of dreams die there. A lot of potential dies there. A lot of lives never become what they could have become because people spend too much time waiting for someday. Don't wait. The world doesn't need another spectator. It needs people willing to act, people willing to lead, people willing to build, people willing to serve, people willing to leave footprints. As I write these final words, I think about my children. I think about the people I've coached, the Marines I've served beside, the students I've spoken to, the entrepreneurs I've met, the people who walk through the gym doors every day looking for something better. And I realize we're all fighting a similar battle. We're all trying to become more than we were yesterday. We're all trying to overcome fear. We're all trying to find purpose. We're all trying to make our lives matter. The good news is that you don't have to do it perfectly. You just have to do it. So when you close this book, don't put it on a shelf. Do something. Make the phone call. Start the business. Write the first page. Take the class. Apply for the job. Have the conversation. Begin the journey. Take action. Because action has a way of changing everything. Years from now, I hope you don't remember every story in this book. I hope you don't remember every quote. I hope you don't remember every chapter title. I hope you remember one thing. Move. Move when you're scared. Move when you're uncertain. Move when you're tired. Move when you're doubting yourself. Move when nobody else believes in you. Move when the outcome isn't guaranteed. Move because your future is waiting on the other side of that decision. One day you'll look back and realize that the biggest turning point in your life wasn't when everything became clear. It was the moment you stopped waiting and started moving. Now it's your turn. The path is in front of you. Take the first step and leave footprints worth following. About the author. Kenny is a retired U.S. Marine Corps and Army combat veteran who overcame the trauma of war, personal hardship, and life-altering adversity to becoming a business owner, founder, entrepreneur, motivational speaker, and mentor coach. Today, he empowers students across the country with raw, real-life stories of struggle, growth, and triumph. This has been Move Anyway, The Knight's Armor Principles, Volume 7, by Kenny Knight III, read by Rick Gines.